It begins with silence, a silence so vast it swallows the stars. In that silence, a single world gleams, Trantor, the heart of the Galactic Empire. A planet not of oceans and continents, but of endless metal. A world that forgot what soil felt like. A world that became a city. From orbit it is breathtaking, a shining sphere of silver and steel, latticed with light, pulsing like the mind of a god. Beneath its domes and towers live 40 billion souls, each believing themselves part of something eternal, an empire that had lasted 12,000 years, an empire that believed it would last 12,000 more. But eternity is a beautiful lie. Voice slows. Every empire thinks it has escaped the pattern, that its borders are final, that its power is destiny. Rome thought so, as its legions marched across the known world. Byzantium thought so, even as its walls cracked under the cannon fire of history. The British Empire thought so, ruling under the illusion that the sun would never set. And Trantor, Trantor believed it most of all. The camera sweeps down through clouds of smog and gold light. Steel spires rise for kilometers, each crowned with glittering domes. Skyways hum with the flight of aircars, gliding above endless layers of commerce, government, and life. Deep below, a million levels of machinery grind in synchronized rhythm, powering the planet, feeding its people, sustaining the illusion of control. Every street thrums with the pulse of a civilization at its peak. Every citizen walks with the quiet arrogance of belonging to something infinite. The Empire has no rivals, no equals, no boundaries. Its fleets patrol a million worlds. Its bureaucrats calculate the fates of entire systems with cold precision. Its capital, Trantor, is not a city. It is civilization itself, and yet, hidden within its perfection, something is dying. This is not a story of conquest, it is a story of inevitability. For even as the towers of Trantor reached toward the heavens, their foundations began to crack. Corruption spread through the ministries like rot in marble. Innovation slowed. The spark that once built the empire began to flicker, smothered beneath its own weight. Trantor had become the galaxy's brain, and its burden. When a civilization becomes too vast to fail, history begins sharpening its knife. Soft pause. But this story is not just about Trantor. It's about us, our cities, our networks, our systems of power. Because every time we look into the mirror of history, we see the same reflection, the same rising curve of brilliance, followed by the same inevitable fall. So the question is not if empires collapse. The question is why we keep pretending they won't. Cue a rising hum of tension. 12,000 years of dominance. A galaxy unified under a single rule. And yet, within a few centuries, all of it would fall. Not with a bang, but with a slow, suffocating decay. The empire that built stars would forget how to light them. Imagine it, the scale, the arrogance. Entire planets devoted to a single industry, armies that could extinguish worlds. Worlds that fed nothing but bureaucracy. At its height, Trantor was the ultimate paradox. A world that ruled millions, yet depended on them for every breath. Its food came from 20 agricultural worlds. Its water was piped from distant moons. Its energy harvested from suns halfway across the spiral arm. Pull one thread, and the illusion would unravel. And still, its people believed. Because belief is the last defense of the dying. They told themselves the empire was eternal, that no collapse could touch them, that Trantor's metal sky was the ceiling of destiny. But beneath that sky, in the hidden chambers of mathematics, one man was already calculating the end. His name was Hari Seldon. Music titans, growing subtle, analytical, he would become the prophet of decline. The one who dared to measure the fall of civilization, and the architect of a plan that would outlive the empire itself. But before Seldon, there was arrogance. And before arrogance, there was faith, in systems, in numbers, in walls of steel that could not rust. Every empire begins with a story, and the story of Trantor began with a promise. That order could conquer chaos forever. The paradox is ancient. We build empires to escape entropy, to impose meaning on the void. Yet every empire becomes the very thing it fears. Rigid, predictable, unable to adapt. And when the future changes faster than the empire can understand it, collapse follows. The music slows, melancholy, reflective. There's a strange comfort in believing we've reached the peak. That technology, wealth, or ideology can preserve us. But permanence is the rarest element in the universe. Even the stars burn out. Even galaxies drift apart. So what chance does a civilization have? Cut to the ruins of ancient Rome. Once, marble shone here. Senators debated beneath domes that glittered like the heart of the world. And yet today, only silence and dust. The same pattern echoed across centuries. From the Forbidden City to the Kremlin, from the City of London to the shining towers of New York, Dubai, and Shanghai. Every empire writes its epitaph in advance. Somewhere in the machinery, the decay has already begun. Return to Trantor from orbit, it still glows. From the ground, it still shines. But deep below the surface, where ancient machines hum and air tastes of metal, engineers whisper of outages. Supply ships from the outer worlds are arriving late. Departments are overfunded, yet underperforming. And at the edges of the galaxy, border systems are growing restless. The empire is too vast to feel the tremor, but the tremor is there. And so the illusion endures. The emperors walk their marble corridors. Blind to the widening cracks, ministers sign decrees no one reads. Citizens scroll through endless feeds of imperial triumphs, too exhausted to ask what they really mean. The city never sleeps, but it no longer dreams, because the truth is simple and brutal. The more powerful a civilization becomes, the more fragile it grows. Complexity breeds dependency. Dependency breeds collapse. One failure cascades into another until the system eats itself. And when it does, the fall looks sudden, but it never is. It begins in whispers, in paperwork, in apathy, in the quiet surrender of imagination. Trantor believed it had mastered history, but history was patient. It waited, like a silent equation, written across the stars, waiting for the moment when faith turned into inertia. And when that moment came, not even the emperor could stop it. But what if someone could predict it? What if there existed a science capable of reading the rise and fall of civilizations, not in omens or prophecy, but in mathematics? What if decline was not chaos, but pattern? And if that pattern could be known, could collapse be controlled? Could destiny itself be rewritten? Music builds toward a crescendo. This is where the story truly begins. In the twilight of the greatest empire ever known, one man would see the truth others feared. He would turn history into an equation. He would measure the lifespan of empires and find them wanting. And in that revelation, he would spark a revolution of time. As Trantor glitters in the dying light of its false eternity, we are left with a question, one that echoes through every age, including our own. If greatness is inevitable, why does collapse always follow? Because perhaps the fall of empires is not tragedy. Perhaps it is evolution. Perhaps collapse is not the end, but the beginning of something wiser. The galaxy doesn't know it yet, but the countdown has begun. And somewhere in the shadows of Trantor's endless corridors, a mathematician is already writing the future. The lights of the city flicker. A whisper spreads through the data streams, a single word, still meaningless to most, but destined to reshape the galaxy forever. It began with conquest and ended in worship. For 12 millennia, the Galactic Empire expanded across the spiral arms like a slow-burning fire, each century consuming another cluster of stars, another frontier, another 1,000 worlds. The story of humanity's dominion over the galaxy was not written in blood, but in mathematics, in the careful precision of logistics, of trade routes and migration patterns, of terraforming schedules planned generations in advance. It was not passion that built the empire. It was bureaucracy. When the first emperors unified the core worlds, they promised not glory, but order. No more wars between the stars, no more chaos of isolated systems. And for the first time in history, one flag stretched from the galactic center to the rim, one language, one law, one calendar of time. And with that order came the illusion of control. Trantor, the capital, grew from a modest planetary administration into a world-sized metropolis. Its surface was covered, centimeter by centimeter, with metal, towers piercing clouds of exhaust, administrative levels stretching downward for kilometers. It was said that if you stood at the equator and fired a beam of light across the horizon, it would strike another tower within a heartbeat. There was no wilderness, no ocean, no unclaimed space. Trantor was civilization itself, an artificial world that had replaced the natural one. The Empire's expansion became a kind of religion. Each new planet annexed was another verse in its cosmic hymn. Entire fleets crossed light years not for conquest, but for assimilation. New colonies were not conquered. They were absorbed, transformed, wired into the imperial network like neurons connecting to a galactic brain. At its height, the Empire governed 25 million inhabited worlds. Its armies spanned the stars. Its economy moved in rhythms measured not by decades, but by geological time. No empire in human history, not Rome, not the Mongols, not the British, had ever come close to such scale, but it all began the same way. A single planet, desperate to expand, a dream of unity that became a machine, and a machine that eventually forgot why it was built. Trantor's rulers called it the Age of Expansion. In the early centuries, humanity moved outward with boundless curiosity, exploring, learning, building. The Empire's early scientists were poets in lab coats. The engineers were artists of metal and gravity. They dreamed of worlds made perfect, of cities that would never decay. Terraforming teams reshaped planets into replicas of the core. Oceans were seeded, atmospheres balanced, weather tamed. Entire ecosystems were designed and uploaded like code into reality. The Empire was not just a political entity. It was an act of creation. And like all creators, it began to mistake power for purpose. Each new world was folded into the grand design. Hyperlanes connected the galaxy like veins. Communication beams pulsed faster than thought, linking trillions into a single conversation. To the citizens of the core, the galaxy seemed eternal, a shining clockwork mechanism whose every part knew its place. They called it Empire Eternal, but the irony was invisible to them, for what they had truly built was not a monument to eternity, but a trap, because the larger the empire grew, the slower it moved. The more it tried to control, the less it understood. And as history teaches, from Rome's overextended frontiers to Britain's far-flung colonies, power without limit becomes its own undoing. The Romans thought they had reached the world's edge, then they drowned in their own complacency. The British mapped every ocean, then lost control of their own island. And Trantor, for all its brilliance, had built something far larger than the human mind could comprehend. Yet, in the glow of its apex, none of this mattered. To live in the age of Trantor's glory was to breathe destiny. The stars themselves seemed to hum with imperial pride. On the outer rim, new citizens wept as the banners of the eagle and sun were unfurled for the first time. In the core, philosophers wrote essays declaring history complete. Progress had triumphed, the human journey fulfilled. Entropy, they said, had been conquered, but entropy never listens. The same arrogance that raised the towers of Trantor once whispered in the ears of emperors in marble halls thousands of years earlier. The same pride that declared, "We are forever," had already written their epitaph. Because expansion, unchecked, does not lead to strength. It leads to exhaustion. And though none could see it yet, the Empire's golden age had already begun to rust. Hook beat, for in every age of glory lies the seed of decay. The air hums with energy. Every surface gleams with light. Above you, skyways weave like silver threads between towers that vanish into haze. Everywhere, motion. Everywhere, order. Everywhere, the illusion of perfection. In the upper levels, luxury reigns, perfumes, silks, laughter echoing across balconies of glass. The elite dine beneath artificial constellations that mimic the skies of ancient Earth. The temperature is controlled, the weather simulated. No one ever sees the real stars anymore. They are too far above the dome, too faint to be relevant. Down below, in the mid-levels, the bureaucrats work. Billions of clerks and administrators maintain the flow of data that sustains the Empire's veins. The light down here is cooler, the air thinner. Rows of offices stretch endlessly, filled with the quiet murmur of pens scratching on synth paper, terminals flickering with unread messages, and far below them, buried in the planet's mechanical gut, are the forgotten workers, engineers, maintenance drones, recyclers. They rarely see sunlight. They live among pipes that hiss and machines that never sleep. To them, Trantor's sky is not metal. It is myth. This was the price of perfection. Distance between classes, between worlds, between reality and the dream that sustained it. And yet, for the citizen of Trantor, none of it felt wrong. It felt normal. Progress had no smell of oil or sweat anymore. It was quiet, frictionless, automated. When you wanted something, it appeared. When you needed power, it hummed through the walls. When you wanted beauty, the city simulated it for you. The Empire had achieved its ultimate goal, to make effort invisible. But invisible effort is easily forgotten. On Earth, we see echoes of Trantor already. The shimmering cities of glass and algorithm. The digital towers rising from the cloud. We too live in the hum of unseen machinery, powered by distant workers we never meet. Our lives flow through networks so vast we mistake them for nature itself. Like Trantor, our progress feels infinite, frictionless, inevitable. But beneath the surface hum, systems age, code decays, infrastructure strains. The illusion of infinite progress always ends the same way, with the shock of its own failure. Still, in this moment, in this golden age, the Empire seemed unshakable. Every problem had a ministry, every crisis, a committee. And yet, the more perfect the machine became, the less alive it felt in art, stagnation. In politics, ceremony without meaning. In science, repetition without discovery. The Empire had replaced curiosity with comfort, and in that comfort, the first cracks began to form. Philosophers of the time spoke of a new paradox. If perfection is achieved, what purpose remains? They debated endlessly, some claiming the Empire had transcended struggle, others warning that struggle was the only thing that kept civilizations alive. A few whispered that the Empire's greatness was its greatest weakness, for it left nothing left to strive for, but such thoughts were dangerous. To question the Empire's permanence was to question reality itself. And so, those who did were silenced. Trantor glowed, yet its people grew dim. The city's hum replaced the heartbeat. Its order replaced the imagination. Its eternity replaced the soul. That is how civilizations die. Not in war, but in surrender to comfort. And history, even history written in stars, never forgives complacency. Hook pause. The hum of the city continues, but beneath it, something else stirs. In a forgotten archive level, a clerk named Doran Alis sits before a dim screen. His job, to confirm data transfers between two departments that no longer exist. Every day, he stamps thousands of forms, knowing they mean nothing. He used to care once, used to dream of promotion, of making a difference. But the Empire does not reward passion, only obedience. He wonders sometimes what the stars look like beyond the dome, but even asking that question feels dangerous. He signs the final form of the day, a data manifest from the Ministry of Galactic Cartography destination, Helicon Sector, restricted access. He hesitates. No one ever requests files from the outer worlds anymore. Curiosity flickers. He opens the file. Inside, a name, Hari Seldon, far above in the marble corridors of the Imperial Palace. Emperor Cleon I walks among his statues, each one carved in the same likeness, his own. He believes he has ended history, that under his reign, peace has become perpetual. His advisors speak only praise, his census officers report record prosperity. But deep inside, Cleon feels something he cannot name, a silence beneath the triumph, a chill behind the perfection. He asks his minister, when was the last time a new world joined the Empire? The minister hesitates. Cleon doesn't need the answer. He already knows, and in the maintenance tunnels far below, a young mechanic named Rin Vara listens to the rhythm of the planet's heart, the endless rumble of engines that have run for centuries. But tonight the rhythm changes. For the first time in living memory, one of the power cores flickers. Just for a moment, a second of darkness in a world that has forgotten what darkness means. She looks up at the ceiling, wondering if anyone above noticed. No one did. But the city did. And so did the mathematician whose equations would soon measure that flicker not as a fault in the system, but as a symptom of decay. In that single heartbeat of darkness, the illusion of eternity faltered. Doran's forbidden file spread quietly through the network. Cleon's confidence turned into fear, and Rin Vara's tiny power surge was logged by a distant observer, a statistician on a world called Helicon. The data would lead him to Trantor. The equations would lead to prophecy, and prophecy would lead to the greatest act of defiance against fate in human history. The Empire believed it had conquered entropy, but entropy had already begun to whisper back. The age of expansion had reached its zenith. The towers still shone, but the light was hollow. The Empire still stood, but its foundations were trembling. No one noticed, not yet. But in the silence between the stars, history began to turn its page, fade out. Every empire dies slowly, not with a bang, but with the shuffle of paper. Trantor, once a world of builders and dreamers, had become a planet of clerks. The same energy that once conquered the stars now fueled a vast machinery of bureaucracy, looping endlessly upon itself. Every decision required 10 approvals, every request 20 seals, every innovation a lifetime of waiting. The Empire still called it efficiency, but it was not efficiency. It was paralysis disguised as perfection. Ministries had grown like tumors, each duplicating the function of the last. There was the Ministry of Communication, the Ministry of Interdepartmental Communications, and, for reasons no one could explain, the Ministry of Coordinating the Coordination of Communications. Even the Emperor no longer ruled in truth. His word passed through councils, committees, subcommittees, until by the time it reached the outer worlds, it had mutated beyond recognition. And so, the Empire moved forward while standing still. The great machines of Trantor still hummed. The trade routes still glittered across the stars. The statues of emperors still gleamed under artificial suns, but the pulse of creativity had stopped no new discoveries. No daring expeditions, no curiosity left unlicensed. Innovation had become treason. A new generation of leaders rose, not visionaries, but caretakers, men and women whose only skill was maintenance, whose power came not from insight but from obstruction. Their philosophy was simple: change is risk is instability, and instability is death. So they froze history in amber. Every process, every custom, every law was preserved exactly as it had been 1,000 years before the Empire became a museum of itself, magnificent but lifeless. Trantor's citizens were taught to worship procedure. Bureaucratic scripture replaced faith. Submit Form 27B became the liturgy of their days. And for a while, it worked. For a while, the machine kept running because it had been built too well to fail quickly. But when even the smallest cog rusts, the entire mechanism begins to slow, and Trantor's gears were grinding. Compare it to Rome in its twilight, senators debating endlessly while the provinces burned. Bread still distributed, games still played, yet the treasury hollowed, the legions unpaid. Or to modern Earth, where superpowers drown in their own paperwork, where laws multiply faster than stars, and innovation bends beneath the weight of compliance. Every great system builds its own prison. Trantor's was made of data, and still the illusion endured. Propaganda drones broadcast daily news of record growth and perfect order. Holograms of the emperor projected into public squares, smiling serenely while the city beneath corroded in silence. Citizens learned not to look too closely. To ask questions was to risk attention. To notice decay was to invite suspicion. After all, the empire was eternal, and eternal things, by definition, do not rot, but deep within the archives, beneath layers of sealed corridors and forgotten data cores, a few dared to whisper. Historians, scientists, and mathematicians began noticing patterns, tiny deviations in production quotas, statistical anomalies in trade, planetary reports delayed, then redacted, then vanished entirely. At first, they called it noise, then coincidence, then corruption. But one of them, a quiet professor from Helicon, called it something else. He called it inevitability, suspense, hook. The bureaucracy of empire had created a new kind of gravity, not physical but historical, pulling everything inward, crushing creativity, compressing thought until only inertia remained. And once a civilization begins to move only in circles, it can never move forward again. There was a smell to Trantor now. It wasn't strong, not yet, but it was there, if you stood still long enough. A faint metallic tang in the air, like old circuits warming after too long in the dark. The city still gleamed from afar, but up close the marble was cracked. The domes had begun to rust along their seams. In the air, ducts of the great towers, dust gathered, the gray residue of neglect. Once, Trantor's weather systems kept the air perfectly clean, the temperature constant. Now there were fluctuations, small but increasing. A few degrees too warm in summer, too cold in the lower levels. Most citizens ignored it. But the workers in the maintenance sectors felt it first. They would pause, wiping sweat from their necks, staring at the flickering readouts of machines that hadn't failed in centuries. When they reported the anomalies, the reports vanished into bureaucracy. No one wanted to be the one who admitted that perfection was cracking. Even the skies had grown dimmer. The great energy domes that once simulated daylight now flickered, just perceptibly, at dawn and dusk. To the elite in the Imperial District, it was an aesthetic feature, a hint of nostalgia, they said. To the lower classes, it was exhaustion made visible. They felt the pulse of the city slowing, power surges delayed, transport systems glitching. Once, a maglev train stalled for an entire hour between levels. It made the news for a day before being erased from the archives. The city had begun to forget itself. Philosophers, the few who still dared to speak, called it the soft decay. A civilization so vast that no one could see its death happening in real time. It wasn't a collapse of walls or armies. It was the entropy of meaning. People still worked, but they no longer knew why. Factories still produced, but no one remembered who consumed. Students still studied, but the knowledge was outdated before it was applied. Trantor had become a feedback loop of its own success, a culture orbiting a memory. We see it today too, the skyscrapers that scrape the clouds but house empty offices, the algorithms that promise efficiency yet suffocate spontaneity, the corporations too big to adapt, too rich to die. Progress can rot from the inside even while it shines on the outside, and that is the true horror of decay. It wears the mask of prosperity. In Trantor's vast central library, the galaxy's accumulated knowledge was stored in crystalline archives, glowing softly in their dark vaults. But few ever accessed them anymore. The data was too dense, the permissions too complicated, the relevance too abstract. Whole sections of science had become religious texts, quoted but never tested, revered but never understood. Why question what already works, said the ministers. Why repair what isn't broken? But something was broken, and no one could see it because the city had grown too vast for any one person to grasp. The empire's glory was now its blindness. And in that blindness, superstition returned. The people no longer believed in progress. They worshipped it. Machines became idols. Technology of faith. When systems failed, they prayed to the engineers. When ships malfunctioned, they performed rituals instead of maintenance. Science had become ceremony. And ceremony, like bureaucracy, needs no purpose to survive, only repetition. Down in the sublevels, you could see the truth written on the walls, corrosion bleeding through the paint, old repair logs overwritten dozens of times, patches upon patches. Sometimes the lights flickered for hours, and in that momentary darkness, the people of Trantor would hold their breath, terrified not of death, but of silence, because silence was unthinkable. It meant the machine had stopped humming, and if the machine stopped, who would they be? Suspense hook. The empire was not dying in rebellion or in flame. It was dying in the quiet hum of systems too sacred to touch. And that hum, like the beating of a tired heart, was slowing. In the Ministry of Statistics, Doran Alus still worked at his desk, the same clerk we met before, now older, grayer, slower. His screen flickers with endless streams of numbers, but lately, something strange has begun appearing in the data. Productivity ratios falling, energy losses accumulating in the outer sectors, unexplained fluctuations in birth rates. He files the anomalies under temporary variance. His superior signs it off without looking. But Doran can't stop thinking about it. He remembers the file he once opened years ago, a name that never left his mind, Hari Seldon. Elsewhere, in the imperial palace, Cleon Wai paces beneath the statues of his own dynasty. He is older too, his perfect features showing cracks of doubt. He asks his advisors why tax revenues from the periphery are late. They say it's nothing, a delay in transmission. He asks why the Navy's shipyards are reporting shortages. They say it's a clerical error. Every answer sounds the same, every explanation perfect, and perfectly false. Cleon feels the weight of marble around him. Even the palace smells of age now, of dust caught in sunbeams that shouldn't exist beneath the dome. He whispers to himself, if everything is eternal, why does it feel so fragile? And in the slums beneath Trantor's surface, Rin Vera still works among the pipes and circuits. She has grown cynical, numb, but one night she finds something strange in the power grid, an irregularity spreading through the main lines. At first, she assumes it's decay, but when she traces it back, she realizes it's something else entirely, a deliberate rerouting of data from the Imperial core toward an unlisted sector unauthorized. Hidden. She runs the coordinates and finds the name of the recipient. It is a department that no longer exists. Department of Psychohistorical Research. She doesn't understand what it means. Not yet, but she can feel it, the system shifting, imperceptibly towards something new. And far above, in the libraries where few now venture, a man from Helicon walks alone among the archives. He is quiet, middle-aged, eyes sharp with both fatigue and brilliance. He studies the data Doran once filed, the same numbers others ignored. To him, they are not chaos, they are patterns, predictable. He calls it the mathematics of destiny. But to the Empire, it is heresy. For decades, the bureaucrats had buried the truth beneath paperwork, but truth, like rust, always finds its way to the surface. And now, in the deepest archives of the Empire Eternal, a whisper spreads, from clerk to scholar, from scholar to dissident. It is the sound of inevitability taking form. And that whisper carries a single name, Hari Seldon. The marble of Trantor still gleams. The banners still fly, but in the quiet between breaths, the rot has begun to sing. Soon, the hum of the city will falter, and when it does, all the forms and seals and ministries of eternity will crumble with it. fade out. It begins, as revolutions often do, with silence. Hari Seldon walks through the echoing halls of Streeling University, one of Trantor's last bastions of pure thought, his footsteps soft against the marble floors. Around him, the city hums with routine, the machinery of empire still grinding, the bureaucrats still stamping, the ministers still preaching eternal stability. But Seldon has seen the numbers, he has run the equations, and the equations do not lie. For decades, he has studied the behavior of societies, how billions move like a tide, how ambition and fear create invisible currents. He calls it psychohistory, a fusion of mathematics and sociology, prediction and inevitability. To the empire, it sounds like madness. But to Seldon, it is revelation. He doesn't predict individuals, he predicts civilizations. He doesn't read minds, he reads history itself, and in his models, every variable, every probability, every feedback loop leads to the same result. Collapse, not in 1 century, not in 10, but soon enough that the stars themselves will dim with the memory of it. At first, no one believes him. The mathematicians dismiss his findings as statistical coincidence. The politicians call it treason. Even his students hesitate, afraid to speak what the data makes obvious. The empire is dying, and the laws of probability say nothing can stop it. Still, Seldon refines his equations. He feeds in the economic decay, the bureaucratic stagnation, the spread of superstition, the increasing isolation of the outer worlds. Every simulation ends the same way, a dark age lasting 30,000 years, civilization collapsing into barbarism, knowledge lost, worlds burned, until eventually the flame of human progress flickers out completely. Seldon could have hidden his discovery. He could have stayed silent and lived comfortably, another scholar in an ivory tower. But history has a way of choosing its prophets. He begins to teach his students in secret, forming what he calls the project. Together, they explore a daring possibility. If the future cannot be stopped, perhaps it can be shaped. If collapse is inevitable, perhaps it can be shortened. He proposes a plan, vast, audacious, unthinkable, to create a colony at the edge of the galaxy, a sanctuary of knowledge, a place where science and learning would survive the fall, where the wisdom of the empire could be preserved, condensed, reborn. He calls it the foundation. But the word spreads faster than his equations. Soon, spies report his theories to the emperor. To question the empire's eternity is to question the emperor himself. And that is heresy. The rulers of Trantor summon him to the imperial palace. They accuse him of sedition, of undermining faith in the eternal empire. Seldon stands calm before the tribunal. His robes are simple, his voice quiet, his hands folded. He does not plead for mercy. He presents his calculations, graphs, models, projections. To the courtiers, they look like meaningless lines of numbers. But to him, they are the future written in mathematics. He speaks softly. The fall of the empire is not a matter of faith, it is a matter of arithmetic. The hall falls silent. Then comes the laughter. The ministers mock him, the generals dismiss him, the emperor turns away. But in that laughter hides a tremor, because deep down, even they can feel it. The machine of empire slowing, the rust spreading beneath the marble. Seldon's trial becomes legend. He is denounced as a madman, but not executed. His equations are too complex. His words too eerily plausible to kill him would give him power. So they do what bureaucracies always do with inconvenient prophets. They exile him. He is permitted to continue his work, under supervision, at the far edge of the galaxy. To the court, it is punishment. To Seldon, it is opportunity. And as he leaves Trantor, the city he once called the center of reason, he looks up at the endless sky of metal and whispers, "You cannot save an empire by denying its death, but you can save its memory." Suspense hook. From that day forward, the seeds of the future are carried toward the stars, and the equations of fate begin their slow, unstoppable bloom. What does it mean to predict the future? In every age humanity has tried, from oracles to astrologers, prophets to algorithms. The tools change, but the hunger remains the same to know what comes next. But Seldon's genius is not in prediction, it is in acceptance. He understands that chaos cannot be conquered. Only measured psychohistory, he explains, is not about control. It is about probability. No single person can change the outcome of billions, but billions together follow patterns, patterns as inevitable as the orbit of planets.
He says it simply: individuals are unpredictable, but the mass mind obeys laws. To the Empire, this sounds like blasphemy. To modern ears, it sounds like data science. We live in an age that worships prediction. Our algorithms know our desires before we speak them. Our markets rise and fall on mathematical probability. Our politics bend to analytics, our wars to simulations. We, too, are building our own psychohistory, line by line, click by click. But we often forget Seldon's warning. Prediction is not salvation, it is revelation. It shows the path ahead, but not the will to walk it. And that is the paradox of every great power. From Trantor to today, they see the cliff coming, yet they cannot stop marching toward it. For Seldon, psychohistory becomes both weapon and curse. He sees not only the Empire's death, but the shape of what must come after 1,000 years of struggle, guided by invisible hands, until humanity is reborn in a second empire. He envisions history as a grand equation, and himself as its architect. But even he cannot escape the limits of his own design, because psychohistory can predict everything except the unpredictable, the anomaly, the mutation, the single mind that changes the course of millions. He knows this, and it terrifies him, so he creates a safeguard, a hidden counterpart to his foundation. A second refuge, built not of science, but of minds. A second foundation, one that will remain in shadow, manipulating events to keep the plan intact. Fate becomes design, history becomes engineering, free will becomes an illusion, and yet, can destiny truly be planned? Every empire that has ever tried to map the future has failed. Rome's augurs, Britain's historians, America's data analysts, all believed the pattern would favor them forever, until it didn't. Seldon's brilliance lies not in denying collapse, but in accepting it as necessary. He sees decay not as failure, but as part of the cycle, a pruning of civilization before its next bloom. He does not want to stop the fall. He wants to soften it. That is what separates the prophet from the fanatic. Imagine the conversations in his hidden rooms on Trantor before his exile. Students gathered around, the glow of equations reflected in their eyes. Can the future truly be written? One asks. Seldon smiles. It already is. The question is, can we learn to read it? But if the future is known, another insists, then nothing we do matters. On the contrary, Seldon replies, it matters because it is known. Our task is to understand the pattern, not to escape it. That is the paradox that defines psychohistory. In our own world of AI today, we build machines to predict our every move, and then we act surprised when we behave exactly as predicted. We call it intelligence. Seldon would call it inevitability. Somewhere in Trantor's depths, as the Foundation project begins its secret preparations, a faint crack runs through the marble walls of the Empire. A metaphor made physical. The Empire believes it has exiled a heretic. In truth, it has exiled its last hope. The mathematics of destiny have begun, and no algorithm, no emperor, no god can stop what follows. The court of the Empire is a theater, and Hari Seldon stands center stage. The vast audience chamber glitters with gold and crimson. The Emperor's ministers, soldiers, and priests seated like judges of eternity. Seldon is calm. Before him hover the holograms of his models, waves of probability cascading like tides of light. The chief commissioner sneers.
You claim, Professor, that our empire, the greatest in history, is doomed. Seldon bows his head slightly. Not doomed, Commissioner, simply finished. Gasps ripple through the chamber. You speak of rebellion? No, says Seldon, I speak of entropy. He gestures toward the hologram, a galaxy turning red, systems collapsing inward. This is not prophecy, it is physics. The empire is too large to sustain itself. The flow of information lags behind the flow of need. Each decision takes longer, each correction weaker. The margins narrow until they vanish. The commissioner laughs bitterly. And what do you propose? That we pray to your mathematics? No, says Seldon, that we plan for what follows. His defense is not for the court, it is for history. He describes the foundation, a colony devoted to knowledge, built at the galaxy's edge, preserving all that can be saved. A seed for rebirth after the storm. But the ministers hear only treason. They sentence him to exile, life imprisonment on a remote world called Terminus, to continue his encyclopedia project. They believe they've humiliated him. In truth, they've given him the exact outcome he needed. As Seldon and his followers are transported across the stars, he gazes once more upon Trantor's endless cityscape. The domes shimmer under artificial light. The towers gleam like monuments to denial. He knows that within a few centuries they will all burn, yet he feels no hatred, only sorrow. Empires fall, he whispers, but knowledge endures. His ship vanishes into the void. Years later, when the empire finally begins to crumble, when its armies mutiny, its worlds secede, its capital burns, the people will remember Seldon's name not as a rebel, not as a criminal, but as the man who saw the pattern, the man who looked at chaos and found order, the first true prophet of mathematics. And so, in the dying light of Trantor's last golden age, the plan is born. Two foundations, one of science, one of mind. One to preserve knowledge, the other to preserve control. Together, they will shepherd humanity through the storm. That is the paradox at the heart of Seldon's vision. Hope built on inevitability, progress born from decay. He saves humanity not by denying collapse, but by giving it purpose. And somewhere, deep beneath Trantor's steel sky, the empire stirs uneasily. For the first time in millennia, someone has dared to write its obituary. Soon, the empire will face the one enemy it can neither conquer nor command, the future itself. Empires do not fall in a single night. They rot quietly first, from the inside out, until the grand machinery of control collapses under its own weight. So it was with Trantor. For centuries, it had called itself eternal, the navel of the galaxy, the heart of 10 million worlds. Its bureaucrats believed themselves immortal, its armies invincible, but beneath the marble and steel, decay had already begun its slow work. At first it was distant, border skirmishes, missed convoys, governors declaring temporary independence. The center barely noticed Trantor was too vast to imagine true rebellion. But the collapse, when it came, moved faster than even Seldon's models had predicted. It began at the edges, the outer provinces where the empire's influence was a rumor, its taxes a burden, its garrisons underpaid and forgotten. Then came the wars of succession. Generals, long neglected by a decaying bureaucracy, crowned themselves emperors of isolated worlds. Fleets once loyal to Trantor turned their guns on one another. Trade routes vanished, worlds starved, and still the capital denied it. On Trantor, life continued in a parody of order, processions, ceremonies, the same endless paperwork feeding the illusion of permanence. The ministers of statistics still compiled data, though no one read it. The imperial treasury still issued reports on economic growth, though no ships had arrived in years. The center could not hold, but it did not yet know it. When the fall finally reached Trantor itself, it came not with a single strike, but with 1,000 small implosions. Rebellions flared across nearby sectors.
The Imperial fleet fractured, half declaring allegiance to new warlords, half simply disappearing. The flow of grain from the agricultural worlds halted. Food riots erupted in the lower domes. The Emperor, the last of a line stretching back 12,000 years, withdrew to his private sanctum. Surrounded by courtiers and holograms of former glory, he ordered the military to restore peace. But there was no military left to command only fragments, ships with no home ports, legions fighting each other for fuel. Outside, the siege began. A coalition of outer systems, led by the warlord Gilmer of Colgan, encircled Trantor. His fleets, a patchwork of stolen vessels and mercenary crews, cut the planet off completely. For the first time in history, the capital of the galaxy stood alone inside the domes. Panic festered. Factories closed. Energy grids failed. The great metal sky of Trantor, once gleaming with power, dimmed to a dull, dying glow. The people waited for salvation that never came. And then, one morning, the sky fell. Gilmer's forces descended. They breached the orbital shields with weapons stolen from the Empire's own stockpiles. Fire rained down upon the endless city. The Imperial fleet, what little remained of it, fought bravely, then disintegrated. On the planet's surface, towers toppled like dominoes. The metal crust buckled and burned. Trantor, the world that had once ruled the galaxy, became an inferno. The fall of Rome, the sack of Constantinople, the burning of Baghdad, all reborn on a planetary scale, and above it all, the radio silence of the Imperial Palace. There were no victors, only survivors. The warlords looted what they could and fled. The archives burned. The data streams dissolved into static. By the time the fires subsided, Trantor was no longer a city. It was a tomb. The Empire had fallen, not with a roar, but with the slow sigh of inevitability. It begins with light, flashes on the horizon, the flare of burning domes, the arc of plasma strikes cutting through the clouds. From orbit, the planet glows like a dying star. Then comes sound. The thunder of collapsing superstructures, the echo of explosions rippling through the endless metal plains, and beneath it all, silence, the silence of systems gone dead. Inside the lower levels, the air grows thick with smoke and fear. Civilians huddle in corridors that used to hum with power. Children clutch data pads that no longer glow. The ventilation systems have failed, turning the great tunnels of Trantor into suffocating tombs. The old stories said that Trantor had no open sky, that its metal crust sealed it from the stars. Now holes gape in that crust, and through them, for the first time in centuries, the people see the heavens. They stare at the cold starlight filtering through the smoke, and some weep, not from fear, but from the shock of seeing what had been hidden for generations. The stars had returned. In the higher districts, once reserved for the bureaucratic elite, the fires rage unchecked. The Imperial archives burn first. Millions of years of history turn to ash in seconds. The libraries of the university collapse, their steel spines twisting in the heat. Data centers flicker and die. The holograms of emperors past dissolve into static, their faces vanishing mid-speech. Even the great statues of the founders crack under the strain, their metal skin melting, their proud visages flowing like wax. The city that once covered an entire planet now tears itself apart, tower by tower, dome by dome. In the chaos, human nature reverts to its simplest form. Looters swarm through the ruins, scavenging what they can, relics, food, fragments of tech. Soldiers abandon their posts to save their families. The once perfect hierarchy collapses into primal survival. And yet, even amid the ruin, small acts of grace endure. In a shattered marketplace, a dying clerk shields a group of children beneath the remains of a transport hull. In a half-collapsed hospital dome, a medic continues to treat the wounded, though there is no power left. In the deepest levels, monks of the Order of the Vault chant softly, preserving what fragments of knowledge they can. Entropy devours all, they whisper, but memory resists. Days turn into weeks.
The fires burn out, the invaders withdraw, their fleets heavy with stolen goods, and Trantor, once the heartbeat of humanity, lies still. The air smells of rust and death. The steel surface cools under drifting ash. The silence feels endless. Above the ruins, the stars blaze brighter than they have in 1,000 years. A few surviving transmitters flicker to life, faint, broken signals scattered across the void. In one of them, a distorted voice repeats a phrase again and again. "The plan endures, the plan endures, the plan endures." Most dismiss it as interference, but somewhere, far across the galaxy, on a world called Terminus, the message is received. And there, amid the quiet hum of a small scientific colony, the heirs of Seldon nod in solemn recognition. The Empire has fallen, exactly as predicted. For them, this is not tragedy. It is the beginning. The chaos has begun its course, and with it, the long journey through the darkness. In the ruins of Trantor, life clings stubbornly to the bones of Empire. The upper domes are gone, melted, crushed, burned, but deep below, some sectors still function. In the lowest caverns, where ancient maintenance tunnels crisscross like veins, pockets of survivors gather. They call themselves the Downborn, former clerks, soldiers, engineers, priests, all reduced to scavengers. They live among the wreckage, feeding on canned rations, siphoning power from old generators, trading relics of a world that once ruled the stars. To them, history has already ended. But even in despair, stories persist. Among them walks an old man with a data cube strapped to his wrist, a historian who once worked in the Imperial archives. He carries fragments of knowledge salvaged from the flames, blueprints, treaties, philosophies. Each night, by the flicker of a dying torch, he tells the others of Hari Seldon, the man who foresaw this fall. They listen, not because they believe, but because the story gives shape to the void. "He said the Empire would die," the historian murmurs, "but that out there, beyond the rim, a seed was planted. The foundation, our legacy." Some scoff, some weep, but a few, the youngest, look upward, through the cracks in the metal sky, and dare to hope. One of them, a girl born in the ruins, asks, "If he knew this would happen, why didn't he stop it?" The historian smiles sadly, because some things cannot be stopped, only prepared for. In the decades that follow, the survivors rebuild what they can. Trantor becomes a world of farmers, its once glittering domes stripped for metal. The soil beneath, long buried under steel, is exposed again. Slowly, life returns. Grass grows where corridors once shone. Rivers flow through canyons carved by collapse. Nature reclaims the machine. From the ashes of empire, a planet is reborn, humble, green, scarred, but alive, and buried deep beneath its surface, sealed within what remains of the old university, lies a vault inside the vault, a single inscription: "For the foundation, that knowledge may not die." The signal continues to echo faintly across the void. In the outer reaches of the galaxy, the Foundation listens. They mark the date in their archives. Year 0 of the interregnum. The Empire is gone. The long night has begun. But Seldon's voice, preserved in holographic form, still waits to be played, waiting for the appointed time when his plan will unfold. He will speak again, centuries after his death, to guide humanity through the dark. The survivors on Trantor will never hear him, but their suffering is the price of his vision. And so, history turns its page. The Galactic Empire, the mightiest civilization ever built, ends as all empires do, not in sudden ruin, but in the slow erosion of belief. The marble cracked, the steel rusted, the idea died, but the memory remains, carried in data, in legend, in the quiet hum of machines still waiting to wake. The plan endures, the foundation lives, and far away, beyond the ashes of empire, humanity prepares to rise again. The galaxy burns, 1,000 worlds scream into the void, their signals flickering like dying embers, The empire is gone, not just fallen, but erased, like a dream dissolving in daylight. For most, this is the end of history, but for a few, it is the beginning. On the barren world of Terminus, under a pale sun and a sky filled with ghosts of forgotten satellites, a small settlement survives. They call themselves the Foundation. Once, they were scholars and scientists, exiled under the guise of building an Encyclopedia Galactica, a grand record of all human knowledge, but now they understand the truth of their exile. Hari Seldon never sent them away to record the past. He sent them to preserve the future. The Seldon Plan, that impossible equation spanning centuries, begins here, in the hum of their research stations and the flicker of their holographic archives. Every formula, every recorded history, every stored design is a weapon against oblivion, and in the hidden corners of their minds, they cling to Seldon's promise that the dark age to come, 30,000 years of chaos, can be shortened to 1,000. If they succeed, humanity will rise again. If they fail, the galaxy will forget it ever existed. Across the stars, unseen, another seed takes root. The second foundation, hidden at Star's End, far from Terminus, its members are not scientists or traders, but mentalics, telepaths, guardians of thought itself. They are the shadow within the light, charged with the most delicate task of all, to preserve the plan itself. They will observe. They will guide. They will intervene only when necessary. And as the centuries unfold, these two foundations, one of mind, one of matter, will shape the destiny of all mankind. But the plan was never perfect. Seldon's equations could predict masses, not miracles. He could model behavior, not emotion. And somewhere, centuries ahead, an anomaly will rise, a single mutant whose will bends the galaxy itself, a man known only as the Mule. His power will shatter predictions, break psychohistory, and force the universe to ask once more, can destiny truly be controlled? The voice of Hari Seldon flickers to life in a darkened chamber. A hologram, grainy, serene, confident. The empire has fallen as I foretold, but this is not the end. This is the beginning of the second age of man. His words ripple through time, echoing across generations. Each crisis he predicted unfolds like clockwork, political, religious, economic, each one pushing humanity towards stability. Yet with every century, the plan trembles. The mathematics hold, barely. But the people, they are unpredictable. Centuries pass, the foundation evolves. From scholars to merchants, from merchants to rulers, from rulers to conquerors. Knowledge becomes religion. Trade becomes weaponry. Faith becomes control. The Seldon Plan was meant to guide humanity gently through the dark. Instead, it creates a new kind of empire, one born not of armies, but of belief. And belief, once unleashed, can be far more dangerous than steel. Meanwhile, the second foundation watches in silence. They whisper through the centuries, their telepathic tendrils weaving into the minds of leaders, kings, and traders. Whenever history threatens to veer off course, they nudge it back. A forgotten thought here, a sudden change of heart there. To most, they are myth. To some, they are gods. But even they cannot foresee what comes next, because chaos has a face now, and it smiles. The Mule rises from obscurity, a man with the power to twist human emotion itself. Armies crumble before his joy. Empires kneel before his sorrow. For the first time, psychohistory fails. The equations that once predicted the movement of galaxies falter in the presence of one man's will. The Seldon Plan collapses centuries too soon. And as foundation worlds fall under his control, one terrible truth becomes clear. No system can predict the soul. The plan will be rewritten by those who still believe in it and those who wish to destroy it. The galaxy will split again. The cycle continues. Rise, fall, rebirth. Every empire believes itself eternal until the moment it isn't. And somewhere, far from the stars, a familiar question echoes across the ruins of Trantor, whispered by a child born among the overgrown domes. If they were so wise, why did they fall?